Governance, risk and compliance refers to the entire plethora of mechanisms by which an organization manages and directs its activities to meet its stakeholder expectations. As you know, these stakeholders could be both internal and external, and it has to do all these while managing risks and complying with all applicable laws and regulations. Globally, the focus on governance, risk and compliance was reinvigorated after the large number of corporate failures in the early 2000s. Now, all of these corporate failures were driven by failures in financial controls, and a significant journey started in the form of the COB being established and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act being enacted in the US. Although the journey started with the focus on financial controls, organizations soon realized that this was a much broader challenge to address. And since then, the entire focus on having organization-wide enabler for good governance found its way. In India, the focus on governance, risk and compliance also started in the early 2000s with Clause 49 of the listing agreement for public companies being amended to include certain aspects of corporate governance. Then, in late 2008, early 2009, India had its own example of a significant corporate failure arising as a result of weak governance. Since then, policymakers, lawmakers, industry associations, professional bodies and the organization themselves have started getting their act together in the pursuit of good governance, risk and compliance management. The new companies bill that is currently under discussion also contains stringent measures to further enhance corporate governance. Well, most of the Indian companies have taken a first step by increasing the accountability of the independent directors, the audit committees and of the board itself with regard to governance. The next step, which in my view is the biggest challenge, is the ability to have organization-wide mechanisms of managing risk and compliance. This will enable them to identify, articulate, measure and prioritize risks which will need to be then managed on an organization-wide basis. And I feel this is where some of the barriers currently lie, because it's going to be an immense journey to try and do this across the entire plethora of organizations. In many cases, these organizations are looking for technology-enabled tools to incorporate an organization-wide risk and compliance management solution. And I think that may well be the start of organizations having a handle on how they manage risks and compliance. Well, in the current economic climate, as you know, costs are always an issue, and with the number of areas of compliance continuing to increase, the cost will only increase. So organizations are looking for cost-effective mechanisms to address risk and compliance requirements across their organization. A few years ago, every time there was a new risk identified or a new compliance requirement identified, a company would set up a separate project team for addressing that need. For example, if an organization was an SEC registrant and had to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley requirements, and they were in the financial services industry where they had to comply with Basel II, they would typically set up separate project teams for both of them. Also, if they then had to be ISO compliant in various areas, separate teams would be set up in those areas. So, in their attempt to cut costs, organizations are now looking at the lowest common denominator of compliance, trying to achieve that once and seeing how that fits into multiple compliance needs, thereby achieving cost effectiveness. Once again, a standard technology tool helps immensely in this regard to do this effectively and efficiently. Governance, risk and compliance is thus a very wide subject having many ramifications. Indian organizations have clearly embarked on this journey towards better governance as an enabler towards better business. As Indian organizations embark on the journey towards better governance, there are some prizes along the way, both in terms of cost effectiveness as well as in terms of untapped opportunities that it can bring to the table. Last but not the least, during the current economic scenario of prolonged uncertainty, organizations are taking governance, risk and compliance even more seriously to tide over the crisis.